Joe? Hi, I'm Venessa Giunta. I am an author and an editor and an all-around like to talk about things person and a little awkward sometimes. One of my favorite things to do is talk to authors, right? I love talking to authors about their process, their writing, their careers, their marketing, all those things. And I really love just sitting down and just talking about stuff. I mean, communication is my love language. So that's really what I had in mind. I really wanted a situation where I could just have a conversation with somebody. So, and a conversation and a cocktail is really all about us hanging out and drinking together and talking about the stuff. Hey everybody, welcome to A Conversation and a Cocktail. I'm Venessa Giunta, and tonight I am sitting down with Dr. Lisa Yaszek. Did I say that right? I forgot.
You got it. Yeah.
Excellent. Absolutely. I should have asked before we got started. Lisa is one of our guests of honor for Multiverse this year, and we are so excited to welcome you. I know, right? So excited to welcome you to our little con of silliness. So what I'd like to do first, as always, is, it is a conversation and a cocktail. Not everybody drinks alcohol, and that's fine, but I am going to ask you what you're drinking. What are you drinking?
So I am drinking an apple cider mojito. So Yes, I know. And I've never actually had one before, and it was just made and handed to me. So let's try it and see how it is.
You have your own bartender? That's amazing.
Oh, it's great, actually.
Is
okay.
it?
Yes, I'm impressed. It is. It's good.
That sounds really
apple
good.
cider, rum, some lime juice, and then there's mint and cinnamon and star anise in it, just as garnish, but sort of
totally
comes together really, really well. I'm liking it.
Totally drink that. I love that. That sounds yummy. So clearly we're going to have to drink together at Multiverse.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So I'm drinking, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do this yet. I have some backup, well, not backup, but additions. So at Dragon Con, my friend Trisha Woolridge, her husband she had told me about this. Her husband makes strawberry rhubarb vodka.
Oh, cool.
So she gave me a little bit, but I wasn't drinking it at Dragon Con. Right. But then I also have some non-alcoholic peach cider because I wasn't sure if I could drink it straight or if I need to mix it. So we'll see. So I'm going to taste it. We'll see what it's like. I've never had rhubarb. Ooh, it smells good.
I bet it would be really good mixed.
That's what I'm thinking. Dang. That's really good. It's really smooth. You know how vodka can sometimes be burny?
Yes.
It's not. It's not.
Right,
but I think I am going to mix it though.
Well, I like the idea of the strawberry and the rhubarb and then the peach together. It seems good.
Right. So I'm gonna
almost makes it more Southern autumnal, if that makes sense, right? I mean,
Yes.
I think about the irony that I'm sitting here in a sleeveless shirt and then drinking fall cocktails, It
is Georgia.
It is. It is
Georgia.
Yeah, well, it's the time of year when we all put on our fall green and burgundy tank tops instead of our pink and blue.
Yes, exactly. Although I'm doing dark purple, mainly because it's a Multiverse shirt. You can't really see
nice.
it.
Well, I got the memo. I've got my light purple. We got the purple lights in the background. We're all good to go.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. And it matches the whole background. Okay. So enough of that. Because, the drinks are indeed important. So we've got a whole bunch of people out in the audience. Welcome, everybody. I see a Rosie and a Rosemary, and I saw an Anita and a Paige. Very nice to see y'all. So my first question, now normally I welcome authors here, fiction authors generally. I mean, you're an author, you've written a whole bunch of particularly academic papers, which I was perusing. I was perusing abstracts, and I found them very interesting. So normally I ask my guests what their radioactive spider bite was to get into writing or publishing or whatever. But I am going to shift that for you a little bit. I still want to know what your radioactive spider bite was, but you're into science fiction primarily. So what got you into that originally?
So I literally don't remember a world without it. You know, my family were my parents were science fiction fans, and my very first memory in the world is watching Star Trek original series reruns with my parents, and then eating organic vegetables from our garden. So obviously, I was either going to be a farmer or do something with science fiction, right? And farming is amazing, and there's great science fiction farming stories. But I'm glad I'm in the science fiction end of it more than anything else, for sure.
Yes, although that makes me think of shows like Motherland. I don't know if you watched Motherland. Did you watch that?
No, I haven't.
Or it's.
I've heard it's great. I've heard it's great.
It is fabulous. It was so good.
Oh, good.
But yes. Anyway, okay. Sorry. Now.
No. It's on my list, right? Like that's the list is huge, and which is good.
So
I
good.
would hate to run out of things to watch and read. That would be
I would run out. There's so much out there. So much.
Exactly.
Okay. So that makes sense. You know.
Yeah. But if you want to know a little more about like professionally how I started doing it, I can give you that very quickly. So I actually studied postmodern literature and theory in graduate school, and I can use all the big 25-cent words with the best of them. Yeah, in fact, my very first book, when I published it, Amazon used to do a thing where it weighted the scholarliness of a book on a scale of 1 to 16. And I think my book got like a 15.5, my first book. Like, yeah. And then actually after that, I was like, I want to write like more accessible stuff. So I did it. I proved I could do it. It was awesome. But what had happened was, like I said, I'd gone to graduate school to study postmodernism, and which in many ways is right. It's a sister genre to science fiction. They're all fabulous genres for sure. And what I realized though, is I spent 10 years in the wilderness of postmodernism, and I realized I wanted something more utopian, or at least a utopian progress. And I wanted one for me, and I just wasn't feeling it with the postmodernism. And then I came back to science fiction. And in particular, I think I had been reading, what was it that I started reading? Like feminist cyberpunk. So like Melissa Scott queer cyberpunk, like Trouble and Her Friends, Pat Cadigan, of course, queen of cyberpunk forever and ever. And then I came across Cherie Thomas's Dark Matters anthology, and I was like, okay, this is where the future is. This is, I don't care if it's not my future. I just want to hang out at the edges of it and help build it.
Right.
This is where we got to go. Yeah.
Yes.
So at that point, I really realized I wanted to go back into a genre that had not necessarily, I don't want to say utopia, but a hopeful view of the future, and a sense that there were things people could do by connecting to the past and making choices in the present to build different futures. And so I came all the way back to science fiction. And doesn't it make sense? I started with Star Trek, and I ended up right back with the attempts to build utopia in one way or another. And it worked out really well. I was very fortunate because I had started to make that shift in my dissertation, where I did sort of half postmodernism and half science fiction. And then I got a postdoc at Georgia Tech. And then I got a job at Georgia Tech, and that job was teaching science fiction. And I was like, well, okay, here we go. And that really,
That's like the holy grail. You know?
I was very fortunate, right? Well, I was hired to do a lot of different things, and I still do. I teach gender studies. I do occasionally teach postmodernism. I teach science and technology studies, all of the good fun things, lots of feminism. That's always cool. But I was fortunate that when I got to Tech, often junior faculty get like a little service project, or not so little, but like something to work on, to sort of make their own, to do something with, to grow their career with. And when I got there, one of the reasons I was hired was the two science fiction faculty members that they already had at Georgia Tech had just left. One retired and one left. And the one who retired gave his collection of 8,000 science fiction items to the library. And so my boss in the library handed that to me, and they said, grow it, do something with it, right? And so now today we have the science fiction collection at Georgia Tech, which centers on the Budfoot collection, which was the original, literally bud of the collection. I think that's great, right? But today we have, I know, right? So like what I did there. Yeah, so today we have about 17,000 science fiction items. And, novels, oh boy, we have novels. You want novels? We've got them, like back from Charlotte Perkins Gilman at the turn of the last century to the Bethany Jacobs, new trilogy for Orbit. And shout out to Bethany, who used to be at Georgia Tech. So,
that must be really, that must give you all the feels when you see a former student come into that sort of.
Oh, yeah, no, not a student,
right?
but a postdoc. But I did mentor her as a postdoc.
Okay.
So I'll take that. At least.
Right.
I got to touch the magic,
learning.
but I think it was already happening. Yeah. I don't think I get to take credit for it, but I got to stand near it. And anyways, Bethany's work is
so
wonderful.
Cool. Right?
Yeah. So it's been wonderful to get to grow this collection at Tech. And, we've grown a science fiction minor. Now we have graduate courses, and we partner with, both locally based science fiction artists and international artists to do events. And it's been really great. I have to say I'm definitely fortunate to be at a university that really, or an institute that supports this and gets it as the literature that makes sense of science and technology for people.
Yeah, that was one of the comments I was going to make, is that it can be so hard in higher ed, academia, to find a school that that does embrace genre fiction of any type.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
I can remember I have an MFA, and I was thinking about getting a doctorate because I love school. If it wouldn't bankrupt me, I would be in school all the time.
It's part of why I became a professor. Yep, absolutely.
That's very smart. Very smart. But like I sent out a couple emails to some Georgia schools that have a doctorate in creative writing to ask whether I would be welcome there based on what I write. And I typically write like urban fantasy and that sort of thing, and horror. And I got a very precisely worded email where they felt like I would not be a very good fit. I was like, all right.
Well, at least they let you know before you spend a lot of time in the process. So I guess take the win.
That's exactly why I emailed them, because I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time with y'all if you're not, if you're not open to having me as a student, right?
Right.
So, and Rosie says the same. She said she wants to go back to school again so bad.
Yeah.
So bad. Well, Rosie, I'll tell you where I got my master's, because it was a great program. So, yeah.
And then, of course, there's wonderful online master's degree programs.
Yes.
Is it the Seabrook or not Stony Brook? I want to say maybe Seabrook. There's a school up on the East Coast that does a really Stonecrest. I think that's it. There's an MFA at Stonecrest that in popular culture genre writing. So there are definitely places you can do that, right?
Seton Hill. I went to Seton Hill in Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah.
It was the very first master's program specifically for writing popular fiction.
Right.
Specifically about commercial fiction.
Right.
Yeah. When I first started, they were only awarding an MA. And so Paige, you need to look at Seton Hill. But they eventually got accredited for the MFA. And so I went back for like 1 year to do the additional credits. They gave us an opportunity to do extra so that we could get the F. But it was specifically geared, like, we didn't read Hemingway and Faulkner. Right. We read Dashiell Hammett, and we read Janet Ivanovich, and we read across all commercial genres, right? So I thought that was great. So I really wanted to talk to you. So science fiction is not my, theoretically I'd be going for a PhD in my current field, or you could just get an MFA. Never mind. I'm very pressury. Okay. So I am not a science fiction person. It's not my genre. I've read a little bit here and there, but it's just not my genre.
That's cool.
Yeah. So this is kind of one of the things I found really fascinating when I was kind of looking at your body of work was this idea that science fiction is a reflection of the present in which it's written, with but it's not just hope for the future, it's also looking at the past through that lens. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, right. So are we talking about in terms of the past, like how I use it to look at the past, or how authors use it to look at the past? Or yes.
You could do both. You could like start with one and shift into the other, whatever you'd like. I just found the whole concept fascinating. And since I have no real frame of reference,
Got it. Right,
that
right,
makes
right.
sense.
Yeah, right. Well, I think one of the things that's really true, right, is we always associate science fiction with the future. There's lots of good reasons for
Right.
that, and because much of the time it is set in the future. But in particular, right, science fiction grew up at the turn of the last century with the futurist movement, with the Italian futurist and the Russian constructivist movements, right? And these were art movements that were all about like sort of embracing the speed and violence and like technology and sexiness of the modern era and really running with that to like build the future. And these ideas of the future, they're very much, this is where we get our ideas about the future being very high tech, being very linear, about progress being very sort of straightforward. And it's really the futurists who turn us against history and who are really saying, you know, I mean, of course, this combines with new ideas about evolution that are popular at this time as well. But when you bring these together, suddenly we have this idea that people are evolving not just physiologically or biologically, but socially and technologically as well, right? And that is a straight line of evolution, and that the past, everything in the past is primitive, right? So there's these very sort of clear-cut dichotomies that are always present in especially Western thought, but they really come together in that moment, right? And the futurists, you know, very few people actually paid attention to them. They attempted to like design clothes for the masses and art for the masses, and the only people who liked it were like the bourgeoisie, who were supposed to be offended by it, but of course weren't, and science fiction artists and directors, right? So science fiction people like grabbed onto all these ideas and really ran with it. So I do think that we tend to really associate science fiction with the future and with the sort of rejection of the past, right?
Yes.
But a lot of what I do in my own work is I came to this because I like to look at people we don't usually associate with science fiction. And when I started, I don't think this is as true today, but when I started, so that meant like looking at women, looking at Africans Americans and Africans and just and diasporic Blacks in general. These are all different groups with different concerns. I don't want to flatten it out, but
no, of course.
But again, people who seem to have been outside the loop, right? Either because they're global Southerners or they're from less developed countries, or however you want to say that, right? And again, that's implying this sort of Darwinian kind of progress. But also scientists. And in that, in part, because scientists, especially these days, often spend a lot of time trying to explain to you why their work isn't science fiction, right? Especially if they're in the emergent sciences. So, but what do you know? A lot of them do like it, they read it, they write it, they play with it, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. So, and one of the things I've really found less true with the scientists, definitely true when I'm looking at women's science fiction, science fiction by people of color, and often queer folk science fiction as well, is that there's a much greater sort of tolerance for the past, right? And a more sense of, especially you see this in Black science fiction, of progress as being, or time as being more like a spiral, rather than a sort of linear, sort of simple kind of progress, right? So there's always this loop to the past and the present, right? And that's often what drives a lot of these stories, is that there is some sort of techno-scientific issue that needs to be fixed, right? And often people come to the conclusion that the problem is that we've sort of lost touch with certain parts of the past that maybe could help us with this, right? And it's by reclaiming these parts of the past, not necessarily this wholesale nostalgic like retreat to the past, but going to the past and bringing it back into the present to help you make decisions that will build better futures, right? And in particular, right, in Afrofuturism and in Black science fiction in general, there's the idea of Sankova, right? The idea that it's not taboo to go back and get it. And I think that that's exactly what you see at the center of a lot of this science fiction, for sure, is this idea that it's not taboo to go to the past, to get the stuff we need, and to combine it with the cool stuff of the present to build even better futures, let's say.
And I love that too, because the idea that we should toss out the past wholesale is if we can't get anything from it makes absolutely no sense to me, you know?
Right. Now, having said that, I do think we want to have a critical sense of our past and be very careful about nostalgia, right? So, for instance, we have members of the American Supreme Court, this might shock some of you to learn this, who really believe like that we need to return to the past and previous interpretations of law say 400 or 500 years ago that, endorsed things like slavery and marital rape. So again, I do think we want to be careful with the past. There are things that are better in our present than were in the past. And I don't think we want to be naive about that. We die less from illnesses when we take get our vaccines. Right.
From many things.
Other things, right? More people participate in democracy today than ever have in history, right? At the beginning of the United States, 6% of people voted, and now 60% do. That's a big improvement. For sure.
A huge improvement.
Yes.
And, it's really interesting because I feel like just in these few short minutes that we've been talking, science fiction, and I think fiction in general, but definitely science fiction, has such a breadth that I think maybe people don't always appreciate. Right? Yes. Because we're talking about the past, we're talking about the present, we're talking about the future. And really, like, in my mind, the kind of utopia would be where we pull the strengths from each of those.
Right.
And then use that, leave the stuff that didn't work for us behind and move forward with the positive pieces. And to me, like, there's certain types of books. And again, I haven't read a lot of science fiction. I've read a few. Right. I've read like Neuromancer and Ender's Game and Heinlein. I had to read Heinlein because it's my husband's favorite author. And he got very upset with me when I told him I felt like even though I understood why, but like some of it's very misogynistic. And he's like, no, it's not. I was like, but in the time, it wasn't. It was absolutely, many of the books were very forward thinking, but from a modern lens, it's misogyny. He got in a huge fight with me. He actually went to we were up in Pennsylvania for, my alma mater has a writing workshop that happens in the summer. And so he used to come with me. And so he knew a bunch of my professors and he literally was asking them and they all agreed with me. But at any rate,
right.
I don't even remember what I was saying, but yeah. So I don't read a lot. But I like the idea of the more positive, things that I don't like things that are like, oh, everything sucks. Everything's always going to suck and everybody's going to die. And that's going to be it. I like the hope. Jesse Adams is here. Yep. Jesse is one of our co-chairs. Welcome in, Jesse. All right. So how's that drink? How's that drink? Still good?
Mine is still good. Yes. I hope yours is as well.
Mine is excellent. This was a good mix.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. Well, science fiction is a huge tent, right? And it gets bigger when you look backwards in time and you're like, well, sure. Like what we recognize as modern science fiction really takes off at the Industrial Revolution, but science fiction exists. I mean, every culture has speculative stories that sometimes do a pretty good job of explaining the universe. I mean, like there are like stories about time dilation in the Mahabharata that are like really kind of on point in terms of thinking about like the different ways that time works, depending where you are in the universe, right? And all kinds of cultures have these kinds of marvelous stories for sure. I mean,
and I wonder like how much of that overlaps with spirituality, right? Because spirituality, especially a lot of sort of ancient spirituality, played with the idea of time and space and
exactly,
how you become like, for goodness sake, you can look at like, Zeus and he shapeshifts and, moves through time and all this kind of, crazy stuff. So so human.
Yes. Right. Well, even if you've ever read Milton's Paradise Lost, like it would take very little work to shift that into a science fiction story, like so little work, right? It'd be very cool. It'd be a very cool story. Right. So now I lost track of what we were talking about because I got distracted by that. What were we talking about?
We were talking about like the past spirituality,
science
fiction type elements.
Right. Well, I think that makes sense, right? And that, this is something Istvan Cicerirone talks about a lot. He's a science fiction critic, and pretty important one, indeed. The marvelous book called The 7 Beauties of Science Fiction. I recommend anyone check it out. It's very accessible, very easy to read. And he identifies what he sees as being sort of 7 fundamental characteristics of science fiction, right? And one of the things he does talk about is how much science fiction operates as an explanatory framework for the world in a way that's very similar to the way religion works, right? And so it's no surprise that at a moment when people are shifting away from certain kinds of religious certainties, that science fiction becomes more popular, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes total sense, because if you
Yeah.
also, like, a lot of things that were spiritual, like you look in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, a lot of the kind of rules were really about keeping each other, keeping people safe, keeping people healthy, and things like that. And they ended, like, they're practical, right? They're practical.
Yeah, I'm not sure science fiction is always quite that practical, though. I think, I mean, maybe its practical function is, I have a former student who argues that maybe it has an evolutionary function, right? To help us sort of like be able to tell these stories, helps us adjust to these new
Yes,
realities that we
that
live
makes
in.
sense.
And then that's not necessarily specific to science fiction, although I think he has some arguments about why it might be. So, okay. Oh, we've got a question here, so we should go to the question.
Yeah, we
right?
do have a question. So Jesse, I'm assuming it's Jesse, he asked, does the blurring of genre lines, such as science, fantasy, etc., seem to be a more recent phenomenon, or are people just less aware of the genre blending works from earlier? And I tack on, or are we just now labeling it when we didn't label it in the past? So I'll tack that onto the end.
Yeah, right. Well, part of it is, of course, we all know that these are marketing categories that were developed in the first part of the 20th century. I mean, people had a sense, right, that stories, just like we do now, I think you could point to stories that were different. But the language we used was different, right? So the term science fiction was invented in the 1800s, but actually to explain a form of science poetry. Yes, it originally was. Yeah, science fiction was originally referred to a certain mode of poetry that taught you something in a pleasing fashion with a narrative, with a sort of fantastic narrative, right? And if you think about it, that's actually kind of still what we do with science fiction. But that definition dropped out, and it didn't come back until the 1920s when a fan brought it up in the Planet, the first fan magazine. Gernsback saw that he had been using scientific fiction. Say it with me, children. Scientific fiction.
Wow.
Worst word in the universe.
Yeah,
and it shortens to STF, which of course sounds like a social disease. So no wonder Gernsback was thrilled, right? When someone brought up science fiction, and immediately he went for that. But there were lots of words that people used to talk about these kinds of stories: impossible stories, off-trail stories,
I've heard that,
romances. Right. And I have to remind my students the original meaning of a romance isn't hugging and kissing. It's a quest. It's a medieval word, right? For a quest. Yeah. Right. So these are technological romances. And that's why people talked about what Wells wrote as scientific romances, because they're often quest narratives to get something done. Right.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. So lots of different words were being used. And then also, I think people had sort of a sense, right, obviously, that fantasy is different. Like if you go back and look, like the popular genres come together in the 1800s in something that were called the all-story magazines, or in newspapers, which were also working like all-story magazines. Yeah. And that meant all the genres were represented. And even then people had a sense of genre, but their sense of genre was different than ours. If you go back and look, they had cool genres we do not have anymore. So like I said, they didn't call science fiction, and they weren't even calling fantasy exactly at that point. Like I said, it's impossible stories, off-trail stories, all these other kinds of names, fantastic voyages, extraordinary voyages, right?
Weird tales.
Right. Yes. So people are calling this, but they have a lot of other genres that we didn't have, that we don't even think about. And that
I want to hear about those.
Oh, yes. So there were a lot of regional genres. So like we have Westerns, but they would have Westerns, they would have Midwesterns, they would have like Alaskan adventures. There were like polar adventures, there's desert adventures. The Northwest Adventure, apparently that one was extremely popular. Another thing that we don't think about, it was extraordinarily popular, were maritime stories, sea stories.
Oh, yeah.
Which
that makes sense.
Until the advent of science, they were literally replaced by science fiction, which makes sense as we moved from a maritime economy into economies organized by steam and then oil, right? That you see this shift in the genres. And it's cool because a lot of early science fiction writers also did some of these sea mariner stories. And you see this interesting crossover. Or you can think about someone like Jack London, who wrote both Northwestern stories and science fiction stories. So all that genre work, right? As now, people often cross over in the genres for sure. right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it's definitely a time-honored tradition at this
For
point.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And simply what happened was in the opening decades of the 20th century, there's a massive, massive boom in like that sort of public education had started 20, 30 years earlier. We've suddenly have huge
literacy.
reading audiences across race, classes, and gender too. So everyone is reading, and there is and magazines, that's the internet of their day, my friends, and the streaming services. Like if you wanted to be cool and like have the good conversation at the water fountain, you like went and got your pulp magazines and read them, right? And that's when genres as we currently understand them really take off. Right. And that's also when the boundaries get kind of rigid because people want to sell their magazines. So they're like, oh no, science fiction's very special. We have all these things and we don't have romance. There's no Isaac Asimov, 16-year-old Isaac Asimov. No, it's true. Like science fiction had always way less romance than the other genres. And that was on purpose. And Asimov, when he was 16, wrote in and he said, there should never even be a kiss in science fiction. And
he's rolling in his grave.
In his autobiography, he told that anecdote, and the next line is, and that's why I didn't have a date till I was 29. So, there you go.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, and it's especially funny because, you know, when we know that people like Hugo Gernsback, right, who founded Amazing Stories, was actually very much like in favor of feminism and the birth control movement, and like H.G. Wells dated Margaret Sanger, and like she dated actually a bunch of. Oh yes, and in fact, he once said that the 21st century will be the biological century, and then Margaret Sanger will be the real hero that we all know she is, or she'll be finally recognized as the hero she always has been. And I was like, what a way to get a date! That's what you got to tell people.
Right. Some sci-fi fans still have a fit if there's romance in their books. That's true.
But what is the number one best-selling genre right now, especially like if you're looking at Book Talk and BookTube?
Romance. It has been for decades.
Romancy, not just romance. Romance.
Right. Right. But that's also been written forever. It just now got named.
That's right.
That's right. Now got named. They probably better stay away from my books then. I also liked what Rosemary said earlier about genres are like Pringles. You can't pop just one.
I think it's also
smushing the genres together and making them kiss. That's the one that made me laugh.
Yeah. Right. And I think that we're even seeing that even more today, in part, not just because Western authors are playing with the genres and mushing them up again, like with romancy, but because as we remember that science fiction has always been a global genre, we're now looping outward and seeing, right, how it is like, what are the other like storytelling and narrative techniques that other people bring from other cultures with them. Right.
Yes. And I find it fascinating. A couple of years ago, and I didn't delve as much into it because my life fell apart, but I was starting to really look into like Eastern story structure, which is entirely different than Westerns. Like they don't do a 3-act structure.
Right. Yes.
We do. So,
Charlie Jane Anders just did a big newsletter about like why we need to end the 3-act structure, which it's so interesting because like I was raised by like Hollywood writers, and like that's the holy trinity of like how you write, and the holy grail of how you write in Hollywood, with the Hollywood
Trinity.
It all works. It all works. Right. So, but I'm intrigued by these arguments, and I like them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, even something like the Matrix movies, right? By doing a 4th movie, they've taken it out of that 3rd act and pushed it into something different.
And Paige says, I wouldn't know a 3-act structure if it bit me. And I'm the same. I absolutely did not study. My undergrad was not in creative writing. I didn't take a single creative writing class for any kind of credit till I hit grad school.
Right.
But I also don't like the whole idea of structure and plotting based on, you know, you need this to happen here and this to happen here and this to happen here. That's also something that I have so much trouble with that because my brain just doesn't work that way when it comes to stories. You know, I'm like, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. Like, that's all I need. So, Paige, I'm with you.
Do you think you have to know the conventions to break the rules? Right? Like Picasso said you had to do figural painting before you could do abstract. I don't know if Picasso said that. Someone said that, though.
I think personally, if you adhere to if you the rules are subjective, right? Because we just talked about Eastern culture has a
Right.
whole different set of rules, right? So they're subjective, their use is subjective, I think.
Right.
You know?
But some are very conventional and we're upset when they're moved around, right?
Yes, no, agreed. Like, well, and I understand that too. I completely understand that as well. My issue for me personally is that I don't recognize the pieces. Like if I, a lot of, we'll get a lot of suggestions, as you're starting to write and learning your craft and stuff, to watch movies and identify the three acts and read books.
Right. Got
and
you.
I don't recognize them as those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I understand how a story works because I understand how it's supposed to make you feel or how the author wants you to feel as you go.
Right.
And I feel like that's really what my strength is. The structure part is so hard. I've been trying to learn more and more about it the last 5 or 7 years or so, because everybody keeps saying it's a thing I need. So anyway, but I do generally agree that you should know the rules in order to break the rules, because you have to break them effectively, right?
Right. I think that's what I'm saying, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking like I sometimes teach Minister Faust's Coyote Kings of the Space Age Bachelor Pads. Big, brilliant novel, if only for that title, but for so many other reasons. Yes. And it begins not with the prologue or the beginning, but the epilogue, which drove my students insane. And then the first line of that is, first of all, shut the fuck up. And they just were so alienated. And they're like, what is this? And I was like, does it estrange you? Does it make you feel weird? It might be science fiction. But it was interesting to watch how fundamentally just making these something as stupid as calling the prologue the epilogue, like just how much it upset them, when narratively it actually totally makes sense within the story what's happening there, as does the voice once you realize why it's telling you to shut up. But it's very estranging at first, and I remember my students really grappling with it, and then they thought they had this.
Of the movie Memento.
Yes. Where like something's happened and it's all kind of backwards and you have to figure it out. Yeah.
And it's not just backwards, but you learn the things. It's almost like it goes do.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It teaches you to read and think differently. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what I really love about stuff like that. You know what I mean?
It's cool.
But I also think it's super interesting. And it goes to what I think a couple of people have been saying in the chat, that our brains know yes, you will write in a 3-act structure more. Right. You know it, but because we've been doing stories, we've taken in all different kinds of media and things like that.
Right.
I think we consume so much media that it's built in that structure. There's an instinctual programming to it.
Yeah, like I said, 100%. That's what my Hollywood friends, that's what they're all about, for sure.
Yes. And Paige, that is the point. Yeah. Paige, that is also me. Paige and I are so alike. Writing it and knowing it are different things. And that's what it comes down to.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
I know there's something wrong, or I know there's something right. Right. But I may not know the words for it.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So y'all out there chatting, if you guys have any questions, now's the time. So I did want to kind of shift over to, let me see my notes here. So typically, at least now, science fiction is often seen as a man's genre. It's always like, you look at the golden age of science fiction, they're almost all men that are talked about and things like that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where women have fit in, particularly in the history of science fiction. I know we have so many more sci-fi authors now that are women, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
But like in the past, like in the earlier,
I can walk you through it. I've run all these numbers, and I've paid students to run these numbers as well. We've done these numbers a lot. And I've cross-referenced them with work by other scholars and artists. Shout out in particular to Eric Leaf Davin, and who's a scholar who's done some work in the history of women in science fiction. And then, of course, a shout out to Pamela Sargent, pioneering feminist science fiction author and anthologist, who, if I could ever be even a fraction as successful and impactful as her with my anthologies, I'd be thrilled. So anyways, so the numbers, here's what they look like, right? So, and we're, again, obviously talking about the mainstream science fiction community, if that makes sense here. What I mean is like the big magazines that we usually think about and the big name authors and things, because once you start looking at little magazines and at fanzines, the numbers shift radically. And that's something else we can talk about as well. But early on, so if you think about the genres beginning in the 1920s with the first genre magazines, we've counted and we've done the numbers here, and I can tell you, women comprised about 15% of all contributors across all areas of science fiction creation and production. So yeah, I'm including women here as editors. They were often, especially early on, in the back end, so you didn't see them as much, but they were there. And also, once you start to go into the semi-prozines, the situation changes completely, and there are women there from the beginning. Yeah, and in part because many of them really liked when the genre first came together in the 20s, it was pretty scrappy and fairly kind of open to literary and political experiment. And it starts to harden up in the 30s and 40s. And in part, what you see is, so women are in the field. There's about 15% of the field is women. And in fact, in Gernsback's stable of like the first stable of famous science fiction authors, 3 of the leading lights were women. And Gernsback published the pictures of authors with their names. So many people would have known right away that these were women because they were using their own pictures. I mean, they all had really cute, boyish little 20s bobs and everything, but they're clearly women, right?
Yeah.
And and Leslie Stone, who had an androgynous name, and that was her real name. It just happened to be her name. And in fact, when people would mistake her for a man, if they hadn't like seen the picture in the original publication or anything, the editors and other fans would be pretty quick to correct them. So that's very cool.
Love that.
Having said that, what you'd see time and again is like every 3 months, like someone would be like, where are all the women in science fiction? And then 3 months later, you'd get like a slew of aggravated letters from the women. They're like, we're right here, right where we've always been. And in fact, that's why women really loved the letters pages, because they were finally they could find each other there. And they're like, oh, cool. Yeah. So this is cool. So women, they're writing poetry, they're doing artwork, they're doing editing. Women make a big splash in poetry right away too. Science fiction poetry, it's a thing, my friends. It's today. It's really amazing.
It's cool. Still, it's like when I first started my grad program and people were talking about it, I was like, really? All right.
It's hot stuff.
Horror and science fiction.
Yep, that absolutely makes sense to me
for some reason.
Yeah.
Anyway, please continue.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So we've got about 15% women in. Feminist backlash happens in the 30s and 40s, right? Because every time women make big gains, this happens, right? So a bunch of women leave the field, but a whole new generation come in. And so once again, we're hanging at about 15% women everywhere. And now women are moving very visibly by the 50s and 60s into positions as editors and as tastemakers in the field, which is very cool, right? And so that's happening. And then, of course, finally, by the 60s, with the revival of feminism and with a couple other things that happen, science fiction becomes sort of more open again to literary and political experiment. And it's a time when women again feel welcome. And at least in the 60s and 70s, I've done a lot of research on this and talked to a lot of the people who are from that era. The guys were really supportive at first. They got backlashy again in the 80s when we went through that again. But they said like the 60s and 70s, like, you know, people were really good about it. And in fact, I had drinks with Larry Niven a couple years ago, and he was funny schooling someone on like the gender politics, which, as you pointed out, were much more diverse than people remember. So what happens is, though, in the 60s and 70s, with the revival of feminism, women become a lot more prominent within the genre, a lot more visible. They're winning disproportionate numbers of awards. They're getting disproportionate numbers of editorships. And they're just really visible. And that's when the numbers start to go up. Because even as early, like the early 70s, it's still about 15% women. But by 1980s, that number doubles. And so today, depending on what you count as a science fiction magazine, Women comprise anywhere between 35 and 45% of the creative production community. And that's really cool. What's interesting is, as I ran you through those numbers, those are the exact same percentages for women in science over the course of the last century. So the number of women in science fiction always maps exactly the number of women in science fiction. And both of those numbers have been stuck at that 35 to 45% level for nearly 40 years now, right? And that's sort of the trick, right, of contemporary waves of feminism, is to figure out what that's about and how do you address these more invisible inequities.
That's really fascinating. I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising, but it still is to me. What's not surprising is the cyclical nature of, women in what are often considered male-dominated fields.
Right. Yeah. And again, I don't think we can blame the science fiction community for something that's part of a larger pattern throughout America.
Societal.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, because a lot of people are like, oh, the science fiction community didn't want women in it. It's like, no, backlashy America didn't want women there. And John Campbell, but that was a thing too. Part. Yeah. Oh, another thing really quickly, for those of you who don't know, is would you like to know where all the Black readers were of science fiction before Octavia Butler and Sam Delaney and Charles Saunders integrated that community? Yeah, so this is, some of you can see up there the Martian trilogy. This is actually a 1930s Black authored space opera that we're going to be republishing with Amazing Stories next month in November. So in about a month and a half. Right. So it turns out that my students had this question, and they had said, well, where were all the Black people publishing science fiction before it integrated? And I said, oh my goodness, you got to read Cherie Thomas's Dark Matters anthologies. Like Du Bois was writing science fiction, and George Schuyler. And they looked at it and they handed it back to me. They said, well, we know about this. And they said, these are intellectuals using science fiction to do social commentary. And they're like, we want to know where the genre writers were. Like, where were the Stanley Weinbaums and the Hugo Gernsbacks and the Leslie Stones and the Claire Winger Harrises of the genre? So we got a couple clues, including a clue from Chip Delaney. So shout out to him for that. And then also from Brooks Hefner, who's a modernist scholar who looks at detective fiction. And they said, go into the African-American newspapers, the historic newspapers. And sure enough, with just one swipe through, we got the kids trained in how to do archival research, and they recovered 36 stories on just one swipe through. So we were looking at the African-American newspapers from about 1900 to 1960. Yeah, and it's amazing stuff. And here's the really cool thing is, like, they even there was a guy, George Schuyler, he was the Hugo Gernsback of Black genre fiction. He came up with rules for it, and they were in dialogue with and correcting the rules that white literary authors were like. So like he had all the same rules for science fiction as Gernsback, except that you have to have all Black characters. And guess what? You know what? When you tell an alien invasion story and all the characters are Black, totally changes the dynamics of stuff. Or a first contact story. And the cool thing was, this wasn't just a few people reading these. We know that much of this genre fiction really came together in something called the Illustrated Feature section, which was a literary supplement. It ran from 1928 to 1932, and it appeared in at least 14 African-American newspapers with a total subscriber base of 180,000 readers. And the pass along rate there was an active pass along culture that was, encouraged by editors. So we know that the readership was probably double. So we're clocking in 400, almost 500,000 readers. People were laying their eyes on Black science fiction in the 1920s and 30s.
That is
fabulous. At its peak in 1927, Amazing Stories had somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 readers. And that very quickly went down from there. So at that time, there were more Black people reading science fiction than white people.
That's amazing.
I know.
I love that.
Isn't that cool? And
Paige asks,
the editors knew it because they called the science fiction column Amazing Stories at the same time that the white authored Amazing Stories was happening. And that stories that ran in that are the stories that comprise the Martian trilogy. And that's what we're going to be republishing.
Oh, well, there you go, Paige. That's where you can find those stories, because that's what Paige asked in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Also, we're bringing out a book from MIT Press called Radium Age Afrofuturism. And we're going to be looking at Black speculative fiction as it was written by both the high Black modernist authors and the commercial writers of this time.
That's amazing. Jesse asks, is John Jennings working with you, or is he conflating
You are
things
absolutely
inaccurately?
correct. No, he is. So you guys can talk to both of us about this at Multiverse. And in fact, if you see the cover to the Martian trilogy, that is a John Jennings original cover. And it is an homage to the work of Aaron Douglas, who was a Harlem Renaissance artist who's really being increasingly recovered as an early Afrofuturist.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So what he's done is he's illustrated a scene out of the Martian trilogy right there, but in that format. We also have the original artwork in the book done by the anonymous illustrator for the magazines. And John did a beautiful job touching that up for us as well.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to I'm not a science fiction reader, but I'm sold. I'm getting it.
There's a question. Maybe we have time for it.
Radium Age Afrofuturism.
Yes. Coming out from MIT Press in fall 2026.
Yes. I love that. I love that. Oh, that's so exciting. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not a science fiction reader, but you've hooked me. I'm in. Jesse asks, do you think that science fiction conventions have tended to be socially exclusionary? And if so, do you think that has affected the makeup or size of readership and fandom? That's a good question, Jesse.
It's a great question. And you know what? People have been arguing this question for a really long time. If you go back and look at this, I do think, yes, absolutely. Of course, there's a politics of exclusion. Science fiction people, you know this. We are all very touchy people, and we get very passionate about things, and we get into fight. We fight and we love passionately, right? And we know that the very first Worldcon, there were two major fan groups, right? The Futurians, and that was like Frederick Pohl and Judith Merrill and Asimov and Heinlein. And then another group, and I'm forgetting their name, but that was the group that hosted Worldcon, the very first Worldcon. And they were in a fight with the Futurians. And so they barred all of the Futurians from the con, except the women. They were allowed to come in.
For once.
Yes.
The women are allowed.
That kind of fighting, right? And we know if you go back and look at like the foundings of WisCon and read all the paperwork around it and the magazines like Janus and the early feminist zines, we know that the whole reason that feminist science fiction conventions like WisCon got started and feminist fanzines was because women felt they did need a venue of their own because they were being blocked out of panels at cons. Or if cons were setting up gender panels in the name of equity, they would load the panels with men.
Which makes no sense.
Well, you know, we do live in a world, well, we don't need to go there right now. But yes, sometimes things go backwards.
Yes.
Or are backwards.
We've
got another question?
Yeah, we've got a question, and it's back. How do you feel AI is going to structure the future of science fiction writing? That is an excellent question, but we don't have a bunch of time to cover it. But do you have some thoughts on that you would like to share?
So, right. I mean, I think that I already know at least one marvelous science fiction poet who is using AI as a tool to help him think through how to craft and shape his poems. So I think that as a tool, right, like we all hated Wikipedia when it first came out, and now we all use it without thinking twice. I think that the AI tools we currently have, it's going to be the same thing. I think that in 20 years, as we develop protocols for using them, as we figure out better ways to train them, as we figure out ways to reimburse artists for the way for their
ethical
craft,
ways to train them.
Done. But I'm hopeful that this may go a little bit like Wikipedia, that right now it feels a little junky, but there is also opportunity with it. And it is a tool. And like when I heard this poet talking about how he uses it, I got very excited. And I'm like, oh, we all need to be using it this way. This is very cool. Do I feel really bad for like, you know, John Joseph Adams and the other editors who've been flooded with AI stuff. I feel bad for like someone like Chuck Tingle, who honestly turns it out really quickly all on his own. Like, you know, we do celebrate him for that. Right. But I do think it's a tool like any other tool. Never forget that Nietzsche thought that the typewriter would make us all illiterate, right? And never forget that the Catholic Church was vehemently against the printing press. So I don't want to go into this with some sort of technological like Ludditism, like being a Luddite or anything, right? I also think, though, it is not. You guys, come on. The current AI boom, we've hit we've done with it what we can do. It's going to take another paradigm shift to do more. This is not.
Mm-hmm.
It is changing things, but I don't think it's like the end of writing. It's certainly not the end of teaching. I can tell you that. It's another tool. That's sort of where I'm at with it.
I would be happy.
I think. One last thing. I think that 200 years of science fiction stories about artificial intelligence have completely made us unprepared for the reality of AI. And that's where I'm going to end it.
That is probably true. Probably true. I just wish that they had trained them ethically, because I could see so many really. I
wish our smart cars were programmed ethically.
I mean, capitalism, man.
Yep, okay, 100%. But also just as we learn our limits, we don't always think through some of this. I mean, some of this blindness is, and some of it's improving, right? Natrice Gaskins, a marvelous Afrofuturist digital artist. Go check her out, my friend. She's in the Smithsonian. She's in the MoMA. She's wonderful. She went to Georgia Tech. But she talks about the ways that we can help make AI better. So it used to be that every 5th time you asked an AI program to draw a black man, it would give you a monkey. But if you report it every time it happens, she does, that stops event, and more quickly than you would think. So we do all, I think, have a responsibility here to not just throw our hands up and say, well, this is up to the federal government or Elon Musk or whoever is going to do this. We all have a stake in this one, and we can do something about it.
I'm hoping that this gigantic settlement that they're doing and the later court cases will give these companies an impetus to do it correctly, to do it right. Because it'll cost less on the front end than it would after a court case, right? So I'm hoping that because I feel like there are authors, there are artists of all different calibers who might be interested in being part of the LLM's learning input.
I already know plenty of artists who are go ahead, scrape my books for free, because better that you have my words in your AI than someone else's. And I think that's a point to be made as well.
Right. And, so if they would have done it ethically, I would not feel the way I do about using it. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So, but hindsight's 2020, right?
Sure. And if you want to feel bad about using AI, go look at the amount of electricity it's used and where those energy farms are being built.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's the real problem. If you ask me, that's the fundamental problem with AI. Yes. I think it's a pain right now for creatives and all stuff that we're going to have to work out. But I feel, no offense, I feel way worse for the people whose lands are being just taken away from them. So that you and I can draw things with 6 fingers.
Yeah, so, and their music. I mean, their water being, their land being poisoned. And,
oh gosh, the water. Oh my God, do you know how much water? Do not read ever how much water goes into 5 minutes of YouTube production. It's so bad.
So much.
Especially because I love YouTube. So
we're going to shift off of that because we were talking about hope. I want to take Paige's question, which is, can we pre-order the Martian trilogy?
You know what? That is an excellent question. And I would tell you, yes, I'm fairly sure you can. That sounds terrible.
Well,
I was going to say,
we'll know for sure by multiverse.
We will know for sure by multiverse. Well, I would know right now. I hadn't even thought to double check. I'm fairly sure you can pre-order on Amazon. I'm going to check for that right now. And also on the Amazing Stories website, you should be able to get updates there.
Perfect.
I think that we have a pre-order situation going on here.
We do love pre-orders.
I know.
Pre-orders. This has been such a fun conversation.
Yeah, I've had a great time.
That is always my goal. Are you excited for Multiverse?
I am. I'm really looking forward to it. It's been great. I've been on research. I'm on teaching leave this semester, so I've been doing research and I've been writing. So I'm excited to go be around people and get to talk about science fiction. It'll be really great. Yeah. The research leave has been wonderful, but it'll be equally wonderful to get out and see all of you.
Yes.
I'm very excited. We're all going to get to see John Jennings and hear about what he's working on right now. And I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to talk with the other authors. Like my favorite thing when I've gone to Multiverse in the past has been hanging out in Authors Alley. I think I've maybe sold 2 books, but who cares? Because like I've had so much fun hanging out and chatting with other people or swapping books with people. So, you know, like all great science fiction conventions, right? One of the things that's great about us as a community is like, we're not always super huge on hierarchy, right? And like fans can become readers, can become writers, can become editors, can become fans again. And there's a lot of porousness in that community. And I really value that. And it's really, I think, a chance for us to be together as the family we are. Sometimes a big, weird family, it doesn't love all its branches, but that's family for you.
That's a regular family.
Yeah, exactly.
Me. That's a regular family.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are so excited to welcome you to Multiverse as a guest of honor. I know we've been trying to get you there in that capacity for a couple of years, and we finally were able to get the schedule sorted out.
I know. So, it's aligned. It's wonderful.
Yes, we're so excited. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much,
on Conversation and a Cocktail.
And thanks to everyone in the audience. You've been great. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. And don't forget, it's always time to what? Go indie now. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, Joe, roll the end. Come on. Joe's not on it today, y'all.